So this session is about Examiety, how to help students through test anxiety. And we're going to talk about effective test preparation strategies that will help students put their best feet, there we go, forward on any exam. And so a little bit about me. My name is Maureen Lamb. I am the Dean of Faculty and the Dean of Academic Technology and Innovative Pedagogy and a Latin teacher at the Ethel Walker School in Simsbury, Connecticut. So what is Examiety? And so Examiety is defined as student stress centered around taking tests. This is the way it is defined by Quizlet and the JED Foundation. I think that a lot of us have seen an uptick in Examiety. I saw it even before the pandemic, but post-pandemic, I feel like it is at an all-time high. In my 16 years of teaching, it is more than I have ever seen previously. There is definitely a rise in student stress levels, even around small assessments. There is less resilience, I find. And so when students are taking something and getting something wrong, I find that there is far more of an unwillingness to kind of put themselves out there. There's also a lot of perfectionism. I see a lot of times students really wanting to get things right. And if they don't, they're extremely disappointed in themselves. And that's really challenging, but also a fear of failure. I think that one of the things that we can do to most help our students is to give them opportunities to try things and fail and get the feedback they need to be successful. I think, I guess, again, post-pandemic, it's been very challenging. I think combined with the social skills they may have missed out on or other challenges they may have had, it's just rising to increased levels of stress. So let's talk a little bit about how we can help with that. So my role here is to talk a little bit about my ideas for assessment. And so this is my kind of outline of how I approach assessment with my students, the 5 F's of assessment. Assessments should be something that is familiar, not just familiar with how they're going to be assessed, but what they are going to be assessed on. Both things need to happen. I would say that it's really important to provide things like practice exams so that students know the format in which they're going to be assessed. So even if it's not the exact same material, students know what the question types are going to be that are going to be asked. This is something we see all the time with IB, with AP, with SATs. Students already are familiar with the question types. So if they're going to be getting those question types, even with these more formalized, standardized exams, why shouldn't we provide that for our students in the classroom? So that's something we can do to really help our students. And we can even do that in Quizlet. If we're using Learn and Test with students, we can provide the types of questions that will be asked and have students practice with those types of questions. We can also provide sets for students. I love to provide sets for students in the classes on Quizlet so that they can review the material. Something else I do that seems to help students as they're reviewing right before an assessment is that I will take all of the relevant sets on Quizlet and I will combine them into one larger assessment set. And so students can kind of pop through all the questions on the set. So these are giant sets. They have a lot of questions on them, but it's something that has everything in one place that makes it easier for students to deal with. Assessment should be something that's frequent. So, but not necessarily graded. I know when I say frequent assessment, it can be challenging because grading takes a long time and giving that much feedback to students can take a long time, but making sure that students are familiar with their assessment as well as having frequent assessments so they know what that feels like and they know that, okay, this is how it is really great. You do not have to grade every assessment. However, if students can receive feedback, that's great. One of my favorite frequent assessments I use is honestly Quizlet Checkpoint, because that's a frequent formative assessment where students can get immediate feedback on whether they got something right or wrong. And as a teacher, I can see what percentage of the class understands the material, what percentage of the class needs more help or support on the material. That's something that can be really, really helpful. Another thing that I find really helpful is to have flexible assessment. So students can choose different aspects of the assessment. So giving students agency either over topic, over which parts of the assessment they want to do. Oftentimes I'll do a 5-part assessment and maybe they choose 4 to demonstrate their learning and show what they know. Something that you can do with students as they're reviewing for the assessment too is create flexible review options. That's one of the reasons I love using Quizlet. They can do things like a flexible review option with flashcards. They can do a flexible review option by choosing match if they like being timed. If they don't like being timed, they can use learn. There's a lot of different options they can use for their review. They can even use Q chat. They can ask questions and have more of a dialogue where they're getting more of one-on-one feedback on their answers. So creating levels of flexibility, not just in assessment, but on the way students are reviewing for assessment can be really, really powerful. Focused. This is one that I have been trying so hard to do. In fact, I went entirely to focused assessment last year, and it really was a game changer for me. As a language teacher, I found that oftentimes when I was giving assessments, I was having 4 or 5 skills on that assessment that I was assessing and making sure students knew. And that seemed to be a little too much for students because sometimes they weren't always aware of what they should be focusing on and what they should be aware getting feedback on. And so 2 big things that I changed was creating more focused assessments. So for example, if I'm doing a reading comprehension assessment, it's just going to be reading comprehension. I'm not going to add a written element to that. I will assess them on that at another time so they don't have to switch which skill they're doing from an interpretive skill to a presentational skill. Have them just focus on those interpretive skills for that particular assessment. That way, students can really focus on that and demonstrate what they know without having a lot of different things to focus on, because that can be overwhelming and distracting for students at times. And so my focused assessments also came with rubrics. So students would have extremely clear expectations of how they could demonstrate their learning. And so for me, that was something that really helped my students, focusing on 2 skills, maybe 1 or 2 skills, having a rubric for those expectations, and making sure that when students are doing that, that is what they're focusing on. If they're having another type of assessment on it, doing that another day, doing that another time. That became really helpful. And I think it really helped my students to track their progress better, because they're like, okay, I need to work on my interpretive skills, but my presentational skills are awesome. I'm getting really good feedback on that. And separating it out like that helps them to kind of regulate their learning a little bit more. Feedback. I would say the number one thing about assessment is the goal of assessment should always be a feedback loop between teachers and students. We should know where our students are, and they should know where they are from us. And so for all assessments, I make sure that I ask students questions like, what did you find successful with this assessment? What did you find challenging? And the third one, I keep pretty open-ended. What do you want your teacher to know? I think it's super important that we give students this space to let us know, hey, I didn't sleep well last night, or I'm dealing with this, or even if they don't want to say anything, saying something like, I had a personal issue and I did not perform my best on this. That gives us an indication that maybe they could do a reassessment. Maybe they could demonstrate their learning in another way. Maybe we as teachers can be accommodating in some way. So I think that using that and giving that option for students so that they have the ability to communicate with us in a way that's private and in a way where they feel like they have a feedback loop with their teacher is so powerful. Because for me, an assessment is seeing where my students are, how they're progressing, and seeing where they're challenged and how I can help them. And so that's something I think is really powerful. So viewing assessment through the lens of, this is not something I'm giving you for a punishment or something. This is our feedback loop. This is how you let me know how you're doing, and I can give you feedback on that. And then you know where you are. So everyone is more informed after an assessment. It's a feedback loop.